Everywhere around the world, there are some really interesting, important discussions that universities are having around these three big questions. The what of university education, what do we teach? Why do we teach in particular ways? How should we teach? And what's the point? Why does higher education matter? We hear some extraordinary statistics these days of people telling us that 40% of the jobs that people are doing won't exist in 20 years, that 70% of the jobs that exist in 20 or 30 years are ones that we don't know about. Politicians and business leaders like to tell us that the future lies in the hands of what they call the STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering and mathematics. They're the innovative disciplines as they see them. They see them as more innovative, for example, in the traditional humanities, creative arts and social science disciplines. And whether you're talking about the European Startup Nation Scoreboard, which is a way of ranking European countries in terms of innovative startup companies, or whether you're looking at the Australian National Innovation and Science Agenda, the buzzword that we're getting from politicians and business leaders is that what really matters is excellence in the STEM disciplines. They're right, but only half right. What I really want to suggest to you is that excellence matters in all disciplines. And whether your passion is engineering or music, these are disciplines that we have need of equally. And I'm not the only one who thinks like that. For example, no less an authority than the United States National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine earlier this year described an ideal undergraduate education as one which certainly enabled people to develop real expertise in a particular discipline, for example, a STEM discipline, but which also gave them the breadth which would come from studying creative arts, humanities or social sciences, which they felt were crucial to really foster in students the capacity for collaboration, teamwork, creative thinking and flexibility. There have been other similar studies, for example, in 2009 from Sweden and 2006 from Australia. The Australian study was very interesting because it investigated 600 firms, 600 enterprises, to see which were the most innovative. And what it found was fascinating, that the ones where innovation was really bubbling away were ones where all of the skills across all of those disciplines, STEM and HASS, were being used in a collaborative framework. In the words of one of the business leaders they spoke to, we make sure we employ people who are open, like working in teams, curious, are not really precious about their favourite method, because the sort of work we do is very applied. You have to be able to give up a lot of your adherence to the norms of your discipline, to be willing to do what it takes to help the client, to step outside what you're comfortable with. A lot is happening at the boundaries of what is already known. What I'm suggesting to you is that when universities are debating the what of higher education, what should we teach, what really matters is this balance between breadth and depth. It matters as well in terms of collaboration across disciplines. In the research area, some of the most exciting work that's going on at the moment, for example, in the area of dementia studies, is at the interface between neuroscience and music therapy. Some of those exciting research is truly interdisciplinary. There's another big debate that's going on in terms of how should we teach and learn? A fascinating debate. Some people argue certainly that the ideal that we may still share of the good university as being a place where people learn on campus, face to face, they interact, they take their time, that's somehow a 20th century overhang. Some people argue that the future of the way we deliver higher education should be, as they put it, just enough, just for me and just in time. Micro courses that are very focused around particular skills, or courses that are completely online, such as the mass open online courses, the MOOCs that have become so popular. It's a real challenge. A recent report, for example, from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one of the great universities of the world, MIT, argued that the way in which students are accessing material points to the need for the modularisation of online classes wherever possible. The very notion of a class of students might be outdated. Modularity, as it says at the end, also enables just-in-time delivery of instruction. Big question. I've had a lot of experience with mass online teaching. In fact, I'm just this week finishing the third rollout of a MOOC, a mass online open course. Mine's about the French Revolution. The first iteration had no fewer than 33,000 students from 170 different countries. Exciting, interesting, it was a wonderful experience. There were 36 mini lectures of about 15 minutes, lots of online materials and so on. And I learned two really important things, I think, from that experience. One is the riches that are available in terms of online education, particularly, I believe, at the postgraduate coursework level. But the other thing I learnt was that there is no substitute for some of the attributes of on-campus, face-to-face learning among groups of peers. That online education, as good as it is, in the end has to complement and enrich rather than replace. There's another interesting point about why on-campus teaching matters. Lectures seem very old-fashioned in all sorts of ways, passive, unidirectional, all the rest of it. One very important reason why lectures are important is that they teach a crucial skill, and that is the capacity to listen in a critical, discriminating fashion, to decide what's important about what you're hearing. It was put beautifully in this article in the New York Times 6 months ago by Molly Worthen. Those who want to abolish the lecture do not understand what a lecture is. Absorbing a long, complex argument is hard work, requiring students to synthesise, organise and react as they listen. A durable skill. Certainly, however, what I've learnt from my years as a teacher in a university setting, my experience with MOOCs and so on, is that we must be much more flexible in our classroom pedagogies. That, as is the case in many disciplines already, there needs to be much more problem-based learning as the most fertile way of learning occurring. Much more object-based learning, where students encounter the artefacts and objects with which they're dealing in their disciplines and learn in a much more tactile way. There should be much more flipped classroom learning around universities, in the sense of seminars or tutorials and online materials being the main focus of the classroom, rather than the traditional lecture tutorial format. We need to rethink a lot of the places where we learn. That traditional lecture theatres like this, on this campus, before its refurbishment, it's almost like a museum of audiovisual equipment, isn't it? But there's only one type of learning that can take place there, and it's an instruction type of learning. That when we transform a space like that into this, where students are working in small groups and can communicate to each other through their monitors, or can communicate to the whole group, there is still a room for a lecture in a format like that. There's a podium on the left, but much more creative teaching and learning can take place. We need to create places where students individually can learn and study in ways that suit them, whether it's in small, quiet groups like the women students up the back, or whether it's working individually or together as at this long table, or even working on a whiteboard. We need to create lots of different opportunities for students to do what they will by way of learning. Finally, and in a sense, most importantly, why does all this matter? The point of higher education. Of course, we're told we live in exciting times. We also live in times of great challenge, don't we? And some of those challenges that we face in our lives are ones that regrettably humanity has faced for millennia. Famines, wars, the mass movement of refugees. But we live in a world where we're confronting unprecedented changes in terms of population growth, global warming, contests over resources, and so on. Higher education matters because it gives us our best chance of thinking through what to do, of taking some action. We worry and quite rightly we worry. We worry about the way that across just a century, the population of the world has almost quadrupled. What does that mean for resources? We worry when we see graphs like this that show the way that since 1990, average annual temperatures around the world have been significantly, measurably higher than they were before 1960. And we have disconcerting visual evidence that reinforces those changes. The Arctic polar ice cap in 1980, 30 years later in 2012. Terrifying. In this part of the world, we worry that in southern Australia, where I'm speaking this evening, we worry that that red bit down the bottom shows that rainfall in 2015 was among the lowest we've ever had in 150 years in Australia. At the same time as we know that temperatures in southern Australia were higher than we've ever had. We worry about the impact of climate change and population pressure on areas that are really significant for the world's biodiversity, like the Amazon basin. When satellite photographs show us in green the extent to which land clearance, forest clearance is going on in that absolutely fundamentally important treasure of the world. We worry about resource wars, that the countries along the valley of the Nile seeking to improve the standard of living of their inhabitants are increasingly at loggerheads about who owns precious resources. It's not surprising that so many of the conflicts, of the wars, of the civil wars that are happening around the world today are wars about resources. What I want to suggest to you by way of conclusion is that higher education has a fundamental responsibility in giving students, new graduates, the best shot at trying to come to terms with that interlocked series of crises. We need higher education systems that emphasise excellence, but which also enable students to develop strong senses of integrity, of strong senses of ethics that come from understanding the importance of the search for truth in research. We need a higher education system which is about excellence, but flexibility and creativity as well, where people will have a really good education in a discipline, in a major, but have a flexibility of approach to enable them to come to terms with the changes that they'll encounter in their lifetimes. We need to create learning environments where people will make the most of the riches of the internet, but ideally where they will interact with other people, and ideally as well people from many different backgrounds and many different parts of the world, because in the end, the most important thing about higher education is that it is about citizenship. Universities at their best are helping people develop so they can live and work and belong wherever it is they choose to live. That they will have respect for others and for their environment that will enable them to be effective citizens. I like to think of a rather old-fashioned mural in our ceremonial hall, Wilson Hall at the University of Melbourne, done in the 1950s, which shows humanity reaching out for the stars, for knowledge, as it emerges from a sort of morass of ignorance. I think in the end, what really matters about higher education is the challenge and opportunity it gives to all of us to think through those fundamentally different challenges we all face and which we can never respond to while we treat university education as just the acquisition of a very narrow skill base. Thank you.